So nice to have you all back. I hope you enjoyed your conversations. And again, just recentering us a little bit. Why language and culture? Why are we even talking about that for you all as external providers of services? I'm kind of here. I'm curious. I think we had encouraged some individuals to be identified as reporters. So those of you who would like to report out some of the aha moments that you heard in your small groups, I'm curious about them. Who would like to share?
I can go. We kind of talked about the importance of being respectful and asking questions and being very open to hearing and learning about another culture and making sure that we integrate those things within our visits. And also just the learning of a language and making sure, if a child is in the process of being a dual language learner, what does that look like? What can that look like for the child, and reassuring the parents that they really didn't lose their first language, they're just learning their second, and just kind of being aware of that and being really open. And for me, I just think it's really fascinating. I love to learn about other cultures and I love to learn about different languages. So I think it's just about building that relationship so that you can have those conversations with someone in a very respectful way.
Well, Michelle, I think Patrick and I can leave. We don't have to talk. I'm just kidding. No, I think that's fantastic. Michelle, one of the things that really stuck out for me is just the idea of being that openness, right? And being willing to be a risk taker and somebody who's just open to that and doesn't cringe, right? That body language is so important. Patrick and I deliberately wanted to speak in the language other than English at the beginning, and if you would have been in the same room, I would have been able to really get a sense how people would have reacted to that physically, right? Sometimes we tighten up or we're like, oh, what's going on here? And that's normal, right? That discomfort is kind of normal because all of a sudden our brain is really trying to reach out and comprehend what's going on around us. But we need to be aware of that. And we need not be afraid of that because our families will pick up on that and they'll defer back to English or they'll feel uncomfortable as well. And we don't want them to feel that way. We should be celebrating an emerging bilingual family, without a doubt. Anybody else? Thank you so much, Michelle. You fantastic.
I can go ahead and go. For our group, we talked about considering myself as I'm Native American. I'm also coming from the Navajo Nation. So listening to Mr. Warito introduce himself, you start establishing that kinship through clans. I'm listening and I'm like, are we related in any way through clan wise? And even though there may not be no blood relation, there may be some kinship in terms of clans. And we also talked about the importance of language and culture. That is your identity. That is who you are, and it bridges that bridges it bridges establishing those relationships within your community, within others around you, programming, those type of things. So that is very important. I feel to myself as well. So strong identity lets you know where you're from, who you come from, and you carry that with you. And so it's been a really strong factor in who I am as a Navajo woman. So that's very important.
Patrick, would you like to tease that out or?
Sure. I think one of the things that we often hear is that people would say your languages are your identity, like who you come from and your family and sometimes just by community, right? But for some tribal communities, it's identity with relationship with your natural world, right? Because that's you'll say I'm the child of or the grandchild of Mother Earth or Creator, whatever you want to say. And so it's that spiritual identity with not just only people, and in some cases you can go as far as like the animals or whatever, right, and things like that. So it's a deeper understanding that sometimes people know about, and some people are not aware of those kind of things. So just by listening to how somebody introduces themselves, you can say, oh, that person understands, or that person is grounded, right, in their not only their language but their cultural ways. So it's good to hear that. Appreciate it.
Yes.
Fantastic. Is there anybody else that would like to share before we move on? Okay, that's my teacher wait time. So if we can move on, Andrea, thank you so much. And let me collapse what I have here in front of me. So we just shared out our thoughts. So if we can move on to the next one. So what are the challenges of creating an environment that values the home language other than English as truly an asset to learning, relationship building, and affirming the identities of parents, their children, and communities? We'd love for you guys to look at that question, reflect a little bit, and place some ideas in the chat, trying to respond to that question. So again, what are the challenges that you all confront as external service providers about creating an environment that truly values these things? Patrick, I want to hear some of those challenges that you have. Place those in the chat really quickly, reflect on that briefly, place a few of those ideas in the chat, and I think Patrick is going to take it from here.
We're going to wait for people to put their thoughts in the chat and kind of read some of your thoughts. Okay. All right, let me see here. See and hear, it is valued. I think sometimes that coming from an environment of deficit, you tend to lose the affirmation and validity or the validation of your own language and culture. So I think that's important. Sometimes we don't have that. We don't. I know in our work we're all constantly entertaining the question of how do community people begin to value and affirm their own language and their own knowledge, right? And so things like that. So,
Patrick, may I take one?
Excuse me?
May I take one of these?
Sure.
So I'm looking at the first one there from Duan. Some inter-office forms created for families is generally, you're absolutely right. Forms are typically created in English only, right? And we're not really think about it, even technology. The technology that we use in many instances leans towards a specific language. So you're correct, even the forms that we use, and we need to be conscientious of that. And if we're truly receiving the information that we're hoping for, when the forms perhaps are in the language that's not dominated by the very same family that we're attempting to serve. That's a great recognition about how perhaps forms need to be updated. Sorry, Patrick, I just wanted to reach out to that one.
No problem. I think the other thing is here from Stephanie, when he talks about relationship, one of the things that and I know from our community and work with the tribal community, relationship is key. It's everything. And so I think that's something to really understand, that knowing and having other people know that you're a learner with them, right? You're learning along with them. And so kind of acknowledging that up front with parents, right? And so a lot of times, as for me as a proficient speaker, people say you're a good speaker. I don't say that. I don't say I'm a proficient speaker. What I tell them is that we're going to learn together, you know, as young parents, because we come across young parents who are struggling trying to learn or speak their language, and you want to let them know that you're at, you know, that to lower that affective filter, right? To that lower that fear with them. So I think that's something to be mindful of.
I'm going to jump out to the comment. Ruth, you said, "While not a provider, I face challenges based in fear of offending or getting it wrong." And I think that really aligns with what Patrick just mentioned as well. You know, building that relationship. And sometimes when I'm in situations where I'm not familiar with the language that's being spoken, I'll ask permission, you know, so can I try repeating that word? Or and what does that mean? And and I try to do it in a way that's relationship building, right? That's non-judgmental. That's you know, I try to just be as open-minded as possible and respectful as possible of that situation. It's amazing what things result from those efforts, and how much I think our parents, our caregivers feel valued in ways that are outside of perhaps the specific service we're intending to provide. So yeah, fear is normal, very normal, and I've experienced it myself. And so I understand that fully. But one thing that I was telling with us, sharing with students earlier this morning, our youth who are bilingual, is that they should walk towards the fear that's not going to hurt them, right? And that's that inner fear sometimes, because when we risk take in this positive way and do it in a way that's respectful, there's a lot of amazing gifts that can result from that. And so if we don't try, we might be losing out, and the family might be losing out, because that's one of the beautiful ways that we can really, I guess, demonstrate an appreciation for and a recognition of that language and culture that's non-dominant as an asset. And that's fantastic to be able to do.
Just real quickly on what Susan put up there, the term that kind of stands out to me is unlearning that needs to happen in order to support. I think that goes both ways, because one of the things that we talk to our families about is finding ways to deconstruct what has sort of over the years, has grown in your perspective, right? In young parents' perspective. So you need to deconstruct that. It's one thing to deconstruct, but the important, probably more important piece is how do you reconstruct? How do you relearn? And what are you going to replace those things with? And that's where you go to your language, you go to your knowledge. It's not just to deconstruct, but it's to reaffirm or to reclaim or to reconstruct, whatever you want to call it, revitalize, right? And so I think that's something it goes both ways. And so it's good to hear that there are some people that are aware of that, because it goes both ways. So just wanted to add that piece right there.
I'm queuing in on Tekla Johnson's comment. Sometimes parents really push English only because they are afraid their child won't do well. And yeah, that's a difficult one. You walk into a family that really has that strong fear that, the language other than English is going to somehow harm their children's ability to access a job or a career, or to excel in school. And that really is a place where we can build knowledge, right? And begin to share with parents what we know, what we've seen in research, and perhaps share some of that, so that way we can ease some of that stress. Because it's very interesting, if you're familiar with the research, those children who have two languages, those two language resources or funds of knowledge, linguistic funds of knowledge to build from, actually tend to excel much more on achievement exams that are typically given in school sites. So school sites where there's high quality bilingual education programs, those children who come from two languages are able to cognitively wrestle with some of the questions in ways that students who are monolingual and monocultural aren't able to do. It's almost like they have an extra leg up, which indeed they do, right? And so I think that really gives the external provider an opportunity to share and learn together, as Patrick just mentioned, together with the parents. So that way we kind of soothe that fear that transmitting an additional language other than English somehow hurts our children and generations to come. That's a huge myth that I think was created for a variety of reasons. One of which is to keep English as a dominant language within our country. And I think that all of us can recognize and value that, English is the dominant language, but that doesn't mean that to be successful, we need to give up one for the other. We could actually maintain both, if not more. And that's another thing too. Children who have two languages actually can develop a third and fourth language much more easier, because their brain is already wired in ways to develop additional languages and bring them in.
But what we wanted to talk to you guys about is this this language environment, right? We all know that we're immersed in English, right? In the way we are today, and English is everywhere. Everywhere you go outside, it's on our technology, everywhere, workplace, everywhere. So we're kind of like immersed in English. And sometimes I hear the term, and sometimes from native language teachers, they'll say immersion doesn't work. then our response is, why do you speak English then? Because that's what immersion is, right? You were immersed in it. So this is what we share with our parents when we work with schools. And we show them that in some of those tribal communities, some homes might be only English-speaking homes. And then you might have a home that might be using native language, the local community language. But then again, right? Still English is still coming into that home, either through television, whatever, right? It's still coming in. And so you have these two homes. So some kiddos might come from a language other than English, or in some cases, it might just be predominantly English. And then these schools are then, or these kiddos are then attending schools. Even though you have a school that provides maybe 30 minutes to maybe an hour, 45 minutes, whatever it might be the case of or native language instruction. The point is that if you look at this in the life, in the life of a child, they only get really this much of their own heritage language. And so we know that language learning or language stages of language development, it takes time. It takes time, and then you have to almost immerse that person in the language for them to pick it up, right? And so in this case, schools are facing an uphill battle, so to speak, to try to teach language and try to do this revitalization effort. And so this is just to give you a visual of what our young people and language learners are facing today. So we wanted to show this. I don't know if Adrian wants to add anything to this.
Yeah, Patrick, I just want to say, no wonder we lose languages, right? No wonder assimilation occurs for immigrant families. By the second generation of that family, typically that family becomes all English speaking. And yet there's this great concern. And we have this amazing treasure in the United States of all these amazing languages that are part of who we are, part of the fabric of the US for a variety of reasons, whether it be immigrant, whether it be our indigenous communities, or even some of our Spanish-speaking communities who have been here even before any lines were drawn on maps. And it's just fascinating to see how even if a family wants to preserve a language other than English, the LOTE, and even if they send their children to, let's say, a bilingual education program, look how much green actually is in this slide, right? No wonder we lose language very, very quickly. And if you lose language, you lose culture as well. Culture and language are intertwined. And so the process of assimilation, I think, is very visual and very visible in front of us in this slide. If we could go to the next slide, please. Patrick, do you want to take this? Or would you like me to take it?
Yeah, we can tag team it. Go ahead. I can start, and then you can add in. So one of the things that we talk about with in our work, I'll just kind of use some examples from the work that we do, because a lot of our young parents are not speakers of the language, because that's the first thing they'll ask is like, how do I continue to support my children after they leave school with language support? And so we encourage them to find those people in their families and their community that are speakers, and to try to do a lot of talking with their child. And a parent might know a few words, and whatever you know, whatever you have in your language, share that with your child, share that with them, and then one of the things we also talk about is using words and having conversation in different contexts, right? And where you just say, okay, we're going to start learning language. It should be just kind of natural flowing. You should, whatever situation you are at home, try to whatever, every opportunity at home should be for that. Like, how can I add to this? How can I add language to here with my child and begin to have a conversation and using the language and providing that language-rich environment? So.
Yeah, I just want to, I guess, piggyback in this fashion is that, if we are an external provider, really when we think about a language-rich environment, it's the way we learned our first language, right? How we support language learning with our children. And so when it's recovering a heritage language or maintaining the home language, it really is the same way, the same approach that needs to be taken, very deliberate about communicating with each other in a very active fashion, not where just one person is doing all the talking, but rather where there's space that's intentionally provided for children to respond in that home or heritage language. Otherwise, they become passive learners of that language. And then looking at it through the lens as a service provider who walks into this home, well, you can practice some of these things too. You can repeat what you hear and smile about it, right? And ask if, did you say that right? And that's a fabulous word. You may not understand it. And that's creating a space for you to begin to learn that language and build that trust and that confidence and that relationship ultimately with that family in a linguistic, cultural way that typically isn't approached, right? Sometimes in many instances, our external providers will walk in and they do the job they've been asked to do, and they do it well, and then they leave. But there may not be a deep effort to extend or expand even in our busy time in some small way, because it matters. Again, when children see that language is dominant, English language is dominant, they will begin to listen to that music in English, even though they don't understand it. And they do that because of those social norms, because of those social pressures. And that's going to happen. But you play a role in kind of balancing out and creating equity between languages by disrupting that normal process of linguistic and cultural assimilation. But just by, in some instances, being that person that they don't know, that stranger who walks into the house that all of a sudden says, no, this is good, this is positive. Let me try to say that. And what is that? What does that mean? And start to ask those questions and create these contexts as well. You may not understand everything that's going on, but it goes such a long way. And what a beautiful way to begin to develop relationship with the people that we're attempting to support. If we can go and move on, unless you want to stay on that one. Okay, this next one, what we'd like for you to do is for you to just reflect a little bit more. You've already done this to a certain degree, but reflect a little bit more with in your small groups for 5 minutes max. It might be a little bit less because of the time that we have left. What is it that you can do to support language and culture together with the families that you support? So if you could get off into your little groups, is that okay?
I think everybody's coming back into the main room. Am I on mute or? Okay, good. Thank you again for, I'm sure you had some good conversation, discussion. And the question was, what can you do to support this? And we shared those bullet points that you can see up there. We encourage you a lot of talking with your child, different contexts, responding to your child's attempts and things like that. So we want to hear from the group what you guys talked about and how you can support this language environment.
Hi, this is Dewan from our group. It was turning the awkward moments kind of into humor and getting used to understanding that the parent would rather us try to learn and engage rather than just sit there and not engage. So it was kind of good to get other providers little stories of how they made those little awkward barriers into humor, and it just made the visit even more like gain more of a rapport with the families.
I think as you were talking about that, it reminded me of my mom, because my mom is not an English speaker or whatever. And she would always say, I like that guy because he's really funny. And so I think that's when you were mentioning, that's all, that's really good, building those relationships and lowering that fear factor, right? Good. Next one, whoever wants to go ahead.
This is Susan. In our group, we had a number of themes come up. I work in a home visiting program in St. Paul, Minnesota. We have many refugee families in our community. It's a very diverse community, many different languages, and we've had the great benefit of having consistent interpreters, so people who can help us create these bridges and relationships over time, because it's the same person who's coming with you every week, and so they're a very critical person on the team. And then one of our other group members talked a lot about different ways of empowering the caregiver and utilizing song and books and other modes to bring language into the early childhood environment and with those really little ones.
Thank you very much. I think one of the things that we encourage our language teachers is to use song, right? And because language is very, how do you say it, in rhythm, right? And so one of the things that we encourage our teachers to do a lot of song chanting in the classroom, and that's how language is learned, right? And that's how we learned it. And so I think that's one of those things that we encourage our teachers to do as well. So anybody else before I start naming names?
We were talking in our group, one of the ladies was sharing that she had the parent teach her the words to a welcoming song and a goodbye song so that she could engage that with the child. And so that the child could see her, try to speak their home language. And I think that's such a great idea. In the classroom, we used to do that a lot with the songs. We would do, a verse in English and a verse in Spanish just in our classroom. But I think that's such a good idea for the child to see that an adult is also trying to learn and engage in that child. And so that child's going to, it's an important part of the visit for that child because you're engaging one-on-one and that child's excited. And so when you're doing it in their home language, I think that just really helps them to want to learn it so that they can continue that engagement with you. So I thought that was really cute.
So, may I jump on that, Patrick? I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
You're just elevating the equity, right, between languages. Usually English language is like this, and the language other than English is always like this. You walk into the home and you do that, those languages go like that. And that's beautiful. Sorry, Patrick, go ahead.
No problem. Anybody else want to share before we go? Because we only have about 5 minutes. We have a couple more slides we want to share with you guys real quick. Anybody wants to share?
I think Laura did on Nieto, but I think she went away. I kind of had that impression.
Oh,
I may
okay.
be wrong. I must be wrong. Okay. So what are the benefits of creating an environment that values the home language other than English as an asset to learning, relationship building, and affirming the identities of parents, their children, and communities? Again, this is a big piece of the puzzle, right? Of really, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, creating equity, because there is linguistic inequity daily in our country between the dominant language English, which by the way is a beautiful language. I love the fact that I speak English. I love the access to literature and music and the various cultures that are connected to it. But I love my Spanish language, and I love the other languages that I'm connected to as well. And for all the same reasons, right? It's just such an amazing gift to be able to benefit from and be supported with, and to be able to embrace all these different things that are around us. And the more we teach individuals around us and support them to grow in that fashion, and to let go of that fear, that being an emerging bilingual actually is something that's fantastic and should be celebrated. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to this slide, Patrick.
I'm on me. Go ahead and just go ahead to the next slide, because I think we can just put up all the bullets. I think people can read themselves, but I just wanted to kind of hone in on number 2, where people prefer to express their emotions in their native language. And I think that's something that as caregivers, as you build this relationship, you start to learn maybe a few terms and greeting term, or even the goodbye term, right? Those terms, and I think that really connects with the people that you're working with on an emotional level, right? And that piece. So you're really hitting that emotion part of it. And so I think that's something that I just wanted to kind of highlight. Of course, this is a bilingualism, right? So, next slide is fine. Again, just put up both of them. I think one of the things that we talk about with our young parents is that because they often say, I want my kid to learn Navajo. That's why I put them in Navajo language class. And so one of the things that we kind of talk about is this bilingualism, because when a parent says that, it kind of implies that they don't want to learn. They just want their child to learn, but they're not making any effort themselves as well. So those are just some things that we talk to them about in terms of the benefits of bilingualism. It's not just only for their kid, but it's for them as a language learner. And like somebody said earlier, you're never too old to learn a language, right? And learning along with them is probably one of the biggest rewards, not only for them, but for you as well. So, yeah.
All right. So I think you could tell I've been on this soapbox since the very beginning. The notion of language justice and being an advocate in favor of languages, right? If you'll notice, 2,469 languages are at risk of extinction around the world. And we have a number of them here in New Mexico. And a number of those languages have been here for millennia, our indigenous communities. And for me, specifically, the Spanish language of Northern New Mexico is really on the verge of passing away. Many of the individuals, in fact, I think Tekla had mentioned that there was a recent article about that in the New York Times, of all places. Yeah, we're losing this every day. And when languages go, funds of knowledge go, generational funds of knowledge leave us, ways of knowing leave us. And we really need to be thoughtful and cognizant about what we're giving up in the world by not standing up and sharing and supporting in ways that we can. Even us as external providers, right? The amazing group that we have with us this afternoon. Just the fact that you're thinking about these variety of ways that you can step forward and learning from each other, building capacity with each other is so wonderful. I just wanted to point out some of the terms that are used, and you can see how here in the US, how language other than English is really perceived. So we were limited English speaking ability, LESA. Then we became lepers to a certain degree. Literally, there were some districts that would refer to limited English proficient children as almost diseased. And you need to think about it and really consider that lens that's been applied to children who are really amazingly at the forefront of becoming bilingual, biliterate in many instances. Then we became English language learners as a label, English learners, and perhaps now emergent bilinguals and other perhaps other labels that may come down. But right now, the favorable one is the celebrating the fact that we're emerging in two languages, and again, that should be celebrated. And then the last little area, language exclusion versus language tolerance, language access, and language justice. And just the fact that we all need to really consider where we're at on that trajectory of advocating on behalf of languages. With that stated, if we could go, I believe, to the very last slide, it really is about you, me, us, and we working together. And it's been a pleasure, at least on my behalf, and an honor to hang out with all of you this afternoon and to just be invited. Thank you for the vote of confidence, Andrea and Tekla and Patrick. I don't know if you have any closing words as well.
Just real quickly, I think the reason the work that we do, it goes back for me like 20 years ago when I started working in education. When I was part of a conversation in the Pueblo of Zuni, when one of the elder gentlemen stood up and we were talking about language, and there's a statement that he said, and I still use it to this day, and it's still one of those things that I keep it in my mind. That what he said was, "I refuse to be part of that generation that let the language die." And he said, because I'm a speaker. As a speaker, we are, if our language dies, it's those people that speak it. And so for me, that resonates with me, and it still is kind of keeps me going day in and day out. So I appreciate this opportunity to talk with all of you and to share a little bit of what we do. And, that's it.
Great. Thank you both so much. I saw in the chat that Dewan had the question for you, Patrick, of any resources, websites, app to learn Navajo. And I don't know if that's something you want to address now, or if you want to have us add anything you know of to the resources when we send out links next week. But I saw that, but just wanted to say thank you to you too. And then thank you all for being here. For those of you who need to hop off, but I wanted to address that question in the chat.